I would like to begin by saying that this is a highly sensitive topic and it's highly debated. And I would like to preface this by saying that everyone has a right to be respected and to have their dignity intact. And I will be approaching this subject as respectfully, factually as possible and without promoting discrimination nor harm. I will be discussing points that are raised in public debate while maintaining a respectful tone and complying with YouTube's community guidelines and broader ethical standards. I also need to state that predominantly Africans tend to be conservative about this topic, but I like to believe that I am accepting and tolerant in regards to this particular topic. Also, please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy my commentary in regards to this topic. So let's begin at the beginning. What is a transgender person? A transgender person is a person that does not identify with the role that they were assigned at birth. So, biology is male and female, and sociology is man, woman. So a transgender lady is a lady who did not identify with the role she was assigned at birth, despite being a biological male. So gender is a social construct. A transgender man is a man who did not identify with his role that was assigned at birth. So they are biologically a female. I don't like using this terminology, but a lot of people do, and in the trans community, they call them as cisgender, which means that you identify with the societal role you were assigned at birth. I believe it causes a lot of confusion because you identify with your biology just makes you a man or a woman, in my view. So gender is a social construct and it's not based on biology. And biology is a science with immutable consequences. As a cisgender person who identifies with the role they were assigned at birth and their biology, I can't say that I understand what it feels like to not identify with your biology. So I will not be commenting as a person that understands, rather as someone looking from the outside in and discussing the impact it could potentially have on people that have to face people that don't identify with their biology in terms of sports and culture. So, as a cisgender person, I conform with societal standards of gender. And I've noticed that a lot of people confuse biology with the social construct, especially on X, and they have derogatory comments, language, and they do not respect the pronouns that people have decided to identify with, and which are most suitable to the gender that they identify with. This discourse will be respectful to the gender that transgender people identify with. So, a transgender person does not need to alter their biology to be transgender. They, however, do have the option to surgically and chemically. I believe that once a transgender person has altered their biology surgically and chemically, they tend to conform to the gender that they identify with, and to a certain extent, the biology they identify with. In terms of biology, I mean They have a higher pitched voice. They don't develop their musculature because of the absence of things like testosterone, or because of the presence of testosterone, they develop their musculature and they develop a deeper voice depending on which um, gender they identify with. However, biologically, a transgender lady cannot get pregnant. Biologically, a transgender lady will not have a period. In terms of this discussion, biology is a life science and sociology is a social science. So, sociologically, a transgender person can be a boy, a girl, a man, a woman, a wife, or a husband. Those are all roles. However, biologically, they remain female or male, regardless of the gender they identify with. Biology is permanent, like menstrual cycles, menopause, and ovaries. And transgender people transition to the role that they identify with. Biologically, people who are cisgender do not transition to the role they identify with. They are just assigned that role from birth onwards. In terms of roles, a boy can wear trousers and a girl can wear trousers. A girl can wear a dress and a boy can wear a dress. But that does not make them transgender. It is just a social norm, not a genetic one. A person like Caster Semenya, who identifies as female, is actually intersex and was assigned the role of girl at birth. She did not transition to a woman. Therefore, Caster cannot be classified as transgender. She is female and she identifies with the role she was assigned at birth. In terms of Imani Khalif, she was assigned the role of girl at birth and she did not transition to a woman. Therefore, she is not transgender, regardless of what was stated in the media previously. It has come out that scientifically, genetically, biologically, and socially, she has always been a woman. So, why is this a highly contentious topic that is extremely sensitive? The problems arise when you benefit from the biology while rejecting the privileges of that biology. I believe it was Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie who said, if you have lived in the world as a man with the privileges that the world accords to a man and then sort of change gender, it's difficult for me to accept that that we can equate your experience with the female experience. And she's right. Biological women have a different social experience to transgender women. The biological women do not transition and do not experience the changes of transitioning to the gender that they identify with. That's already a big difference between biological women and transgender women. There needs to be an acceptance that there are differences between transgender women and biological women. And these are social and societal differences that transgender women will not experience the exact experiences of cisgender women or biological women. I believe recently in England or Britain, there came a ruling that a woman is a biological female and the transgender community has been reacting to this negatively because they believe trans women are women. I believe that transgender women are transgender women and should be respected as such. There are experiences that transgender women will go through that biological women will not go through, and vice versa. How common are transgender people in society? You do get Afghan girls who live as boys and who decide to continue living as boys. They are called the Bacha Posh. This is where some families will pick a daughter to live and behave as a boy. This enables the child to behave more freely, attending school and escorting their sisters in public and working. This supports a family where there are no males in the family. So there are no sons, or the father has passed away and has left only daughters. The girl may choose to spend the rest of her life her life as a boy or a male. While in Thailand, you get the lady boy, which can be a derogatory term depending on where you are. However, in Thailand, it's an accepted term for a transgender woman or an effeminate gay man who adopts a feminine gender expression, and in some cases can be a drag performer. Ladyboys are highly visible in Thai culture and entertainment, particularly in beauty pageants and cabaret shows like in Pattaya and Bangkok. However, despite this visibility, they still face discrimination and legal challenges such as a lack of recognition on official documents. From an international perspective, the term ladyboy is sometimes considered derogatory and disrespectful, especially when referring to a transgender woman in Western society. Now we come to this discussion about pronouns. Like, what is so difficult about respecting someone's pronouns? I think as long as a person presents as the gender they are most comfortable with, you then use the terminology of that gender presentation. You don't go out of your way to misgender and be disrespectful to their gender presentation just because you are uncomfortable, because trans people have already been through enough. So what exactly is misgendering? It's the act of referring to someone using words or pronouns that do not correctly reflect their gender identity, which is their gender presentation. It can be intentional or unintentional, but either way, it causes emotional harm and discomfort. So an example of misgendering is calling a transgender woman who's dressed and acting female he or sir. Using he to describe a non-binary person, or referring to someone by their former name. So calling someone James instead of Jane if they have changed their name to identify with the gender that they are most comfortable with. I don't find accidental misgendering as hurtful or harmful as deliberate misgendering, because people do make mistakes and they do apologize and correct themselves, and they do move on and they are respectful in the next interaction. However, when you get intentional misgendering, it is to delegitimize someone's gender identity, and it is considered a form of transphobia. So, how do you bypass misgendering? You ask them how they would prefer to be identified, and you use inclusive language like they or them up until you know their pronouns. And after you've asked them, you just respect their presentation as well. And you correct others if they misgender someone in the group, and you have to, yeah, practice with new pronouns, if because it's okay to learn, and it's not like it's now we come to J.K. Rowling, who has been in a lot of public debates about the transgender community and her stance on transgender people. From my understanding of J.K. Rowling's opinions of transgender people, she is of the mindset that a trans woman is a trans woman and a trans man is a trans man. So she identifies with the biology first, and then genders the person according to their gender presentation. And she accepts that trans people will have different experiences to biological people, and she respects the distinction between the biological experience and the trans experience. Before I continue, who is J.K. Rowling? She is a British author best known for the Harry Potter series, and she also did Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. She's the originator of those stories. She has been a prolific figure in public discussions about transgender issues, and she's on the side of the biological females. Her comments and actions on this topic have sparked significant controversy and criticism, particularly from the LGBTQ plus advocates. While she maintains that her views are rooted in concerns about women's rights and the protection of single-sex spaces. So I believe in 2019, she expressed support for Maya Forstater, where she stated that men cannot change into women. Rowling agreed with Forstater's stance, stating, "Dress however you please, but don't force women out of their jobs for stating what sex is real." This endorsement was widely criticized for aligning with trans exclusionary views. So this is where the problem arises. There needs to be a distinction in the definition of what transgender is. A transgender person is a person that does not identify with their biology. And that means that if you are a transgender man, you don't identify with your biology, which is female. You can't change your biology. You can change your sociology. So you have to take that into consideration when you go into social spaces where predominantly people identify with their biology. This means that you are not entitled to the social space of the biology. You can be rejected from that social space, and rightly so, because of your biology. In 2020, in an essay published on her website, Rowling articulated concerns about new trans activism, arguing that redefining sex to include gender identity undermines women's rights and protections. She was right. She stated, "When you throw the doors of bathrooms, throw open the doors of bathrooms and changing rooms to any man who believes or feels he is a woman. You open the door to any and all men who wish to come inside. Even though her wording is extremely inflammatory, what she is saying is right. The social space where women change based on their gender identity and biological conformity should be protected. It should be a safe space for women to do as they please. It is not it is not about the exclusion of transgender women. It's about the respect for the space of biological females. It should be categorically stated that simply because you do not identify with your biology, it does not entitle you to the spaces of people who do identify with their biology. So, what happens to non binary people? Which spaces should they use when it comes to public ablution facilities? I believe that they should use the facilities that they would have used based on the gender they were assigned at birth. Inasmuch there is inasmuch as there should be a respect for the sociological identification, there also needs to be a respect for the biological permanence. What does that mean? It means that males will most certainly be bigger than females. Males will experience sociology different to females. These distinctions have social implications that transgender people will not experience in the manner that biological females or males will experience. So if transgender women should not be included in biological women's spaces, what should happen? They should either utilize the staff ablution facilities or they should utilize the gender neutral ablution facilities. And in the absence of these facilities, they need to utilize the rooms or the facilities that are in line with the gender that they were assigned at birth. This protects them and it protects the biology and comfort of the people that identify with their biology. From a personal perspective, when it comes to public ablution facilities, I tend to treat them the same way as I would ablution facility at home. So if you can share a bathroom with a boy or you can share a bathroom with a girl, it's the same thing as sharing a bathroom in public. However, I understand the discomfort when it comes to changing rooms where people are bare. That becomes problematic in that there is comfort in knowing that you are surrounded by biological females and it's a safe space for everyone in with that particular biology. And there is discomfort in places like spas where there are bare people that utilize the facilities for females when they are biological males. I am of the view that transgender people do not wish to impose discomfort on biological females. So, majority of the time, they wouldn't utilize facilities that are for biological females. They would utilize facilities that are either gender neutral or of the gender that they're assigned at birth. There are a lot of considerations when it comes to being transgender that and I do believe that they consider other people's comfort and discomfort, and for that they need to be respected. Okay, now comes a random topic of discussion. What about a man in a dress? A man in a dress is not necessarily transgender. They just might feel comfortable dressing in a dress. That's not a transgender person. That's just a person that feels comfortable dressing in a dress. Transgender person is a person that fundamentally does not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. So that means that they can wear trousers, they can wear masculine clothes and still be feminine in nature. That's what makes them a woman. They identify with with the opposite biology. Now comes the next section. Should transgender children have gender reaffirming surgeries and permanent things like hormone blockers while they're children? I don't believe they should, because you may not identify with your biology as a child, but given things like hormones and changes to your body structure, you might identify with your biology at a later stage. And they should be allowed to make that choice as adults and without external influence. I've noticed that a lot of parents liberal parents, in trying to be supportive of their children's gender identity, they wind up pushing for their children to get hormone blockers from the time that they're 12 so that their voices don't change, or their voices do change, their musculature doesn't change, or the musculature does change. And the problem with doing that is you don't know where the child will be at 18, let alone 25. And it may traumatize them and cause changes that are irreversible and should not have occurred had they respected the biology of the child. I believe that there's a reason why you need to respect biology, because it's not only about social acceptance, it's also about choice. And when parents make these decisions on behalf of their children, they remove their adult choice. So when the child rejects the social identity that their parents now assign them, it makes for a difficult conversation, especially when they now have permanent problems like infertility. And if they want children, their choice to have children has been removed from them from a young age by surgical and chemical means. If a person does not identify with the gender role they were assigned at birth, that's okay, because they might identify with it at a later stage in their life. But they need to be given the choice to express themselves however they want to express themselves. But this expression or self-expression does not come at the imposition of their choices on other people. I hope I'm making sense. So you're not entitled to the discomfort of other people. You are entitled to your self expression and your self actualization. This means you are entitled to be transgender. Um, you are not entitled to be in biological females' changing rooms because that causes the discomfort of the majority. You are entitled to express yourself however you wish to express yourself. You're not entitled to imposing your expression on other people. It just goes in regards to being a contributing member of society. This is not about exclusion, rather the consideration of other people. I believe that inclusion means producing facilities that allow for transgender people to feel comfortable. So, if you have a male changing room and a female changing room, you need to have a transgender changing room as well. Um, if you don't have the resources to make a changing room specific to transgender people, then you open the staff facilities to allow for inclusion of transgender people. I believe that trans women are trans women and they have as many rights as everyone else. And this should not result in their exclusion from society. I believe that there should be trans only spaces as well as trans sports, and there should be respect and fairness in regards to transgender athletes in competition. Which brings me to my next point. Trans athletes. I believe J.K. Rowling is of the impression that trans women should not compete against biological females in women's sports. I am of the view that even though there, not even though, I'm of the view that trans women, because they are biological males, are at an advantage over biological females. Some of the arguments against the inclusion of transgender women in women's sports is that they retain male associated physical advantages such as larger hearts and lung capacities. They have greater muscle mass, their bone density is larger, and they have joint leverage. These traits may not be fully reversed by hormone therapy. The other problem is that it's unfair to biological females. Allowing transgender women to compete in women's categories might disadvantage biological females who don't have access to the same biological development. A clear example of this is that when you introduce testosterone to biological females, their musculature increases and their hearts and lung capacity increases, and they are much stronger than females who identify with their biology. Another problem is that trans women in women's sports undermines decades of progress made for women's opportunities in athletics and under laws like Title IX in the US. More problems are safety concerns. In contact sports like rugby or MMA, Some argue that physical differences might lead to greater risks of injuries for cisgender women. Again, I don't like that term cisgender, they are just women. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, there are arguments for the inclusion of transgender women in women's sports. They state that it's part of human rights and equality. In regards to transgender women, should have equal opportunities to participate in sports aligned with their gender identity. I believe trans women should compete against trans women. Their exclusion can be discriminatory or damaging on mental health and well being for transgender individuals. But that's not the exclusion from competing against trans women. Um, in terms of biological females, um, there is a distinction between a trans woman and a biological female. They're not the same thing biologically, they're not the same thing sociologically. In terms of human rights and equality, there needs to be that distinction, which um, is apparent that there is not. This is not in regards to how you treat people, rather, in regards to how the biology impacts the individual. Anyway, arguments for the inclusion of transgender women in sports include hormone therapy reduces athletic advantages. So, studies have shown that after 1 year of gender affirming hormone therapy, transgender women experience significant reductions in muscle mass, strength, and hemoglobin levels. Some argue that this mitigates the advantages associated with male puberty. Inclusion does not automatically mean domination. There's limited evidence that transgender women consistently dominate sports. Examples of trans athletes not winning competitions are used to argue against the assumption of an unfair advantage. And sports are about more than winning. Participation in sports builds community, health, and self esteem, especially at the amateur and youth levels. The emphasis should be on inclusion and participation rather than elite competition. Existing safeguards include policies by organizations such as the NCAA and the IOC, which often require a year or more of hormone suppression before competing, aiming to balance fairness and inclusion. I believe that the data is lacking and incomplete when it comes to the inclusion of transgender women in women's sports. They concede that there's limited long-term data on how hormone therapy impacts athletic performance post-transition, and critics advocate for more rigorous peer-reviewed studies before changing inclusion policies. I am of the mindset that transgender women should compete against transgender women in transgender women's sports. There should be the inclusion of trans women and trans men in sports. You will find that trans men are outcompeted by biological males when they do compete against each other in sports. And you find that more often than not, transgender women outcompete biological women in women's sports. So, what is the middle ground? The middle ground or compromise, people have spoken about open or third categories. Some suggest creating an open category where anyone can compete regardless of their sex or gender. This could preserve fairness while allowing all athletes to participate. So, regardless if you are transgender or biologically male or female, you just compete in that category and then we see who wins. And there is the argument for a case by case assessment where instead of blanket rules, you evaluate each athlete's hormone levels, physical capabilities, and training history individually, which I don't agree with this because it has biases and unfairness. And I will go on to explain this a little bit later. And there's a split between having a split between recreational and elite sports. So you allow for the full inclusion in recreational settings, but apply a more stringent criteria at elite levels where performance and fairness are paramount. When it comes to transgender women competing in biological women's sports, I think there needs to be an element of fairness. It's unfair for someone who's biologically male to compete against a biological female the and have their argument for inclusion be it is a human right. That excludes fairness in regards to what biological women have had to overcome in order to have representation at sports and especially at elite levels. This goes to the imposition of sociological constructs on biological ones. There are permanent results of being a biological male. There are permanent results for being a biological female. You will be smaller than a biological female will be smaller than a biological male. There is no two ways about it. On average, there are physical attributes and advantages to being a biological male over a biological female. Another thing that I have noticed is that there has been the mixing of women, trans women, female, biological female, trans female. You can't be a trans female. Female is biology. You can be a trans woman because woman is a role. But you can't be a woman. You have to be a trans woman. There's a distinction in that this person has transitioned. And it is a respect for that process, and it is an identity that is insurmountable. This is a difficult topic to navigate, and I'm finding that I'm struggling to articulate myself as well as I normally would because I'm trying to be as inclusive as possible without disrespecting anyone's point of view, but while staying true to my understanding and my points of view. I do feel that trans people should be included as equal members of society. That goes without saying. And that should not be determined by how someone chooses to express themselves. And their gender presentation should be respected regardless. What I do have issues with, and where I find myself veering towards J.K. Rowling and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, is the entitlement and imposition. What do I mean by this? It's entering female-only spaces and acting as if everyone should be accepting of a nude male biology in a female biological woman space. That is not about exclusion. That is about conforming to the majority in society. And if you're uncomfortable changing in the male dressing room, then there needs to be the accommodation of trans people in staff spaces. So if there are no facilities for transgender people, let's say at a gym or at a spa, then they should be allowed to use the staff changing rooms, and they should be protected in those changing rooms. What about when a transgender lady goes to a spa and expects a Brazilian wax? And they are obviously um, easy to identify by their biology and not by their um, sociological presentation. I think there needs to be due consideration for the comfort and discomfort of other people. And you are not supposed to impose your self on other people. If you want to go in for a Brazilian wax, sure and fair and fine, go in for the Brazilian wax, but be under the impression that that wax will be done by the person most comfortable doing that wax. That may be a male person or it can be a female person, but I have noticed in the media that majority of the time it's a male person who's most comfortable dealing with the biological males. Why am I dealing with a dicey topic? I noticed that it hasn't come up in a lot of African discourse, and I was hoping to give some insight into the African way of thinking. It is not conservative. I know that I'm slightly more liberal than majority of African people, but that is because of exposure to different types of people and having met and mingled with transgender people before. And this is not to say that trans people immediately want to cause harm in these female only spaces. That's not the case at all. It's about the comfort of the biological females. And it's also about preserving the innocence of girls, especially in changing rooms. In terms of toilets, I'm not too finicky about toilets, but I am finicky about changing rooms. And I have noticed that at gyms, women tend to disrobe and walk around freely. And it would be discomforting to them to have a biological male in the same changing rooms as them. I believe that there is a respectful way to coexist without disrespect and derogatory terminology like you find on platforms like X, where people refuse to properly identify and misgender transgender people. I find that highly unnecessary and hurtful. However, there does need to be the distinction between a biological female and a transgender woman. If you are referring to a woman, in my view, that means you're identifying a biological female. And that is what the British court stated in an earlier ruling. That is not disrespectful to transgender women because they have gone through a transition in order to become trans women. And I feel that to remove the trans label is to disrespect transgender women. That transition in itself is a badge of honor for them because it's staying true to their identity and to their presentation and to their history. I also feel like lumping trans women with women it almost erases the identity of trans women, and that's wrong. Biological women and women do not transition. They do have biological processes that trans women will not ever experience, regardless of the surgery, nor the hormone changes, nor the chemical changes that they may experience. There are fundamental things about biological women that they will not experience. There are also fundamental things in terms of sociology that trans women will not experience that biological women will experience. In the vice versa of that, there are trans experiences that biological women will not experience. There are hurdles as well as triumphs that they will experience that are universal to the trans experience that are not universal to the biological experience. Those distinctions need to be respected. I think calling a transgender woman is confusing. And I also think that calling a biological female a cisgendered woman is also confusing and unnecessary. That has nothing to do with exclusion. I don't believe that you are excluding trans people from biological spaces by recognizing that a transgender person is different from a biological female or a biological male. Trans people transition for a reason, and that transition should be respected overall. So, what have I touched on? I've touched on what a transgender person is, or who a transgender person is. I've touched on the implications of permanent procedures for children and how I disagree with that. And I have touched on transgender women in sports and how they outcompete women in sports. And I've also advocated for the respect of trans people and their inclusion in society. This inclusion does not mean the imposition of trans people in female-only spaces. And the reasoning for that is the discomfort of the majority. You're not entitled to places just because you're included. You are allowed into spaces. So I believe that there should be spaces that are specifically allocated to trans people for their safety and for their inclusion in society. I also read somewhere something profound I believe J.K. Rowling said it, where she said that she found it strange that biological men felt entitled to female only spaces and were imposing their views on female only spaces. And it raises the concern that can men dictate or continue to dictate to women, especially given the women's rights movement and feminism? Are biological men entitled to imposing themselves on female only spaces? In terms of cisgendered men, it's no. But transgender women, are they allowed to dictate terms to biological females? I don't believe they should be allowed to, because they come from the privilege of existing as male prior to their transition. And that's a distinction from biological females who have to bear the brunt of sociologically being smaller and treated differently from biological males. Again, I need to state that this is a highly sensitive and highly debated topic, And I'm aiming to provide insights from the African perspective respectfully and factually. And I will make mistakes in terms of my terminology, and I will make mistakes in terms of my thought processes. But this is not about promoting discrimination nor harm. It's about being respectful and enlightening people that may not understand the topic at large. Um, and it's also about being fair to women and science-based perspectives as well. And I find that in being fair to transgender women, there is an unfairness towards biological females. And that's what I believe J.K. Rowling has taken up and Chimamanda Ngozi perfectly articulated. So, in conclusion, my views are that everyone deserves to be respected, and um, children should not have permanent procedures up until they have reached maturity and are able to make the decisions for themselves without any external influence. And I also think that children should be accepted for who they are and however they present, even if they wind up identifying with their biology at a later stage. This should be allowed because childhood is about self exploration. I think that trans women should have trans only sports. So trans women should compete against trans women, and trans men should compete against trans men, because there are biological differences and distinctions that need to be taken into consideration, and there hasn't been enough research into the implications of hormone therapy, drug therapy, as well as the changes to the body. I do know that under normal circumstances, biological males will be bigger than biological females. In terms of bathrooms and change rooms, I believe that there should be trans only spaces where they can utilize ablution facilities in comfort and in safety as well. Lastly, the bare minimum is tolerance, and at best, there should be acceptance. But overall, people should be allowed to express themselves however they feel. And it's not that difficult to respect someone's gender expression. Hello everyone, Makadini, and welcome to my channel. Thank you for giving me your precious time and attention. Before I forget, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel